God forgives, but Johnny Cash, he never did. For 50 years, he walked the line. He sang for murderers in Folsom Prison, for sinners in the church pews, and for presidents in the White House. He shook hands with the downtrodden and embraced the outcasts. To the world, the man in black was a saint with a guitar, a symbol of redemption. But deep inside the pocket of that long black coat, he carried more than just guitar picks and song lyrics. He carried a list, a mental black book of names. These weren't just people Johnny disliked. No, these were the people who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Men who had betrayed the music, betrayed the truth, and in Johnny's eyes, betrayed their own souls. On stage, they smiled at each other. They hugged at award shows. But when the house lights went down and the silence of the backstage crept in, Johnny Cash wouldn't even look them in the eye. He kept quiet for decades. He let the dirty gears of Nashville turn, taking these secrets to the grave until now. Today, we are opening that book. From the king of rock and roll to the most powerful man in the White House, and finally to the one man Johnny spent his final years despising with every fiber of his being. This isn't just a list of grudges. This is the story of the war for Johnny Cash's soul. To understand the hate, you have to understand the love, and Johnny loved the Grand Ole Opry. In the mid-60s, the Ryman Auditorium wasn't just a venue. It was the Vatican of country music. The rules were strict, the atmosphere was pious, and the management expected every singer to fit a mold: clean, obedient, and family-friendly. But Johnny Cash was never a man to fit in a mold. One night in 1965, when Cash stepped onto that sacred stage, the air changed. The audience felt it. The industry felt it. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements erratic. He wasn't just high, he was furious. For months, the Opry management had been whispering in his ear, "Tone it down, Johnny. Don't sing those songs, Johnny. Be a good boy, Johnny." They wanted a puppet. They got a hurricane. Mid-performance, Johnny didn't reach for a high note. He reached for the microphone stand. With a primal scream, he didn't just knock it over. He dragged it across the footlights at the front of the stage. The glass shattered. Sparks flew. Broken shards rained down on the front row. It wasn't just light bulbs that broke that night. It was Johnny's tolerance for Nashville's hypocrisy. The management was horrified. They did the unthinkable. They banned Johnny Cash from the home of country music. They kicked him out of his own church. Johnny didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He walked away into the darkness, a darkness he felt more comfortable in anyway. Years later, he'd say he didn't need their lights. He had enough fire inside him to burn the place down. The Opry management was the first entry on his list. They treated music like a leash, and Johnny Cash was a wolf that would not be tamed. But if you think fighting venue managers was bold, imagine staring down the leader of the free world, because the next name on Johnny's list sat in the Oval Office. If you'd like to support the research we do to uncover deep stories like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means we can continue to bring these untold truths to light. 1970, America is burning. The Vietnam War is raging, the country is torn in half, and in the middle of it all sits Richard Nixon. Nixon invited Johnny Cash to the White House. But let's be clear, Nixon didn't want a concert. He wanted a prop. He saw Cash as the hero of the working man, the voice of the conservative South. He thought if he could get the man in black on his side, he could secure the votes he needed. Before the show, Nixon's aides sent Johnny a request list. The president wanted to hear two specific songs, "Okie from Muskogee" and "Welfare Cadillac." Now, for those who don't know, those songs were anthems used to mock protesters and shame the poor. They were political weapons. And worse, they weren't even Johnny's songs. Nixon thought Cash was simple, a jukebox that would play whatever tune the man with the money requested. Before we see how Johnny handled the president, if you appreciate stories about men who stood their ground when it mattered most, take a second to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps us keep the real stories alive. That night, under the crystal chandeliers of the White House, Johnny stood before the president and his cabinet. He looked Nixon dead in the eye. "Mr. President," he said, his voice low and steady, "I don't know those songs.
It was a lie. Everyone knew those songs, but Johnny wasn't going to play what Nixon wanted. He was going to play what Nixon needed to hear. He struck his guitar and began to sing "What is Truth?", a song about the lonely youth dying in a war they didn't understand, about the lies of the establishment. The room went ice cold. Nixon's frozen smiles started to crack. Johnny Cash left the White House that night having added a president to his unforgiven list. Because for Cash, music was the voice of the voiceless. Nixon tried to turn it into a political tool, and that was a sin Johnny could never forgive. But betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you admire most. Sometimes it comes from a king.
This story didn't start with hate. It started with brotherhood. Back in the 50s, at Sun Records, Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley were kids with nothing but talent and hunger. They were part of the $1 Million Quartet. Elvis respected Johnny. In the early days, he wouldn't leave the stage without covering a Cash song. But as the years rolled on, the path diverged. Johnny Cash went to hell and back, fighting his demons in the mud, clawing his way out of addiction to find something real. Elvis got locked in a golden cage. The feeling Johnny had for Elvis shifted from brotherly love to pity, and finally, to a deep, simmering resentment. But let's be clear, Johnny didn't hate Elvis the man, he hated what Elvis had allowed himself to become. And he despised the parasites, the Colonel and the Memphis Mafia who were feeding off his soul. In his autobiography, Johnny didn't mince words about the Las Vegas years. Seeing Elvis in those rhinestone jumpsuits, doing karate kicks on stage, to Johnny it looked like the death of a musician. He once visited Elvis backstage in Vegas. The scene made him sick to his stomach. Elvis was medicated, surrounded by yes men who laughed at jokes that weren't funny and praised performances that were hollow. Cash realized then, the Elvis he knew had left the building a long time ago. Johnny never forgave Elvis for the betrayal of his own gift. To take a voice ordained by God and drown it in cheap movies and Vegas glitz, to Johnny, that was a sacrilege. When Elvis died, Johnny mourned, but he wasn't surprised. He had already said goodbye to the king years before. But if Elvis broke his heart, the next group on his list nearly broke his spirit. These were the people who were supposed to be the most forgiving of all. Johnny Cash was a believer. The Bible was his compass, even when he lost his way. He always said he was the biggest sinner of them all, but he believed in redemption. In the late 60s, when Johnny was at his lowest, physically wasting away from amphetamines, looking like a walking corpse, he reached out to the one community he thought would save him, the gospel world. He wanted to record a gospel album. He wanted to sing for the Lord. And the pious, self-righteous gatekeepers of the Christian music industry slammed the door in his face. They looked at his black clothes, his prison concerts, his drug habit, and they called him unfit. They told him, God's words don't belong in a mouth like yours. That rejection cut deeper than any drug. Johnny knew Jesus dined with tax collectors and sinners, but the modern Pharisees in Nashville wouldn't let Johnny Cash sit at their table. They want heaven, Johnny used to say, but they don't want to die to get there. He despised their hypocrisy. He hated the sanitized, perfect image they tried to sell. Years later, when Johnny got clean and became a global icon again, those same gospel producers came crawling back, begging for a duet, begging for a photo op. Johnny's response? A polite no and a closed door. He knew who his real friends were, and they weren't the ones wearing the most expensive suits on Sunday morning. But by the 1990s, the enemy wasn't just religious hypocrites. The enemy was the entire city of Nashville. The 90s, the decade country music lost its soul. Turn on the radio in 1995, and you wouldn't hear Waylon Jennings, Merle Haggard, or Johnny Cash. You heard stadium pop songs with a fiddle thrown in. You saw perfect hats, bleached teeth, and laser shows. The face of this new era was Garth Brooks. Now, Johnny didn't have a personal feud with Garth. Garth always said the right things, always paid his respects. But for Cash, Garth Brooks represented the plastic era, the moment when Nashville stopped being about storytelling and started being about market research. He called them hat acts. guys who played dress-up. In an interview, he said, "I turn on the radio and I can't tell who is who. They all sound like they came out of the same factory." It was an insult to everything the outlaw generation had built. The record labels treated legends like Cash as if they were dinosaurs, embarrassing relics that needed to be pushed aside for the new shiny toys. The song Murder on Music Row wasn't just a lyric. For Johnny, it was a crime scene report. He hated the commercialization, the polish, the lack of dirt and grit. He watched the house he helped build turn into a shopping mall. But all these names, all these groups, they pale in comparison to the final name on the list. Because the last man on Johnny Cash's list didn't just annoy him, he tried to kill him. The year is 1986. Johnny Cash has been with Columbia Records for 28 years. He built that label. He gave them Ring of Fire, I Walked the Line, Folsom Prison Blues. He made them millions. Columbia was his home. One morning, he was summoned to the office of the new head of Columbia Nashville, Rick Blackburn. Blackburn was a young, ambitious executive, a numbers guy. He didn't care about history, he cared about demographics. He looked at Johnny Cash, an American icon, and saw a liability. He looked Johnny in the eye and fired him. 28 years of loyalty, erased in a 5-minute meeting. Blackburn didn't just drop him, he humiliated him. He told the press that Cash was no longer relevant, that he didn't fit the youth demographic. He threw the man in black out like yesterday's trash. Johnny was devastated. He thought his career was over. He thought he didn't matter anymore. Rick Blackburn wasn't just a boss. He was the embodiment of everything Johnny hated. The cold, corporate, soulless suit who thought art was a line item on a spreadsheet. Cash left that office thinking he was dead and buried. And for a while, Nashville agreed. But the story doesn't end there, because the best revenge isn't anger, it's resurrection. Years later, a bearded producer named Rick Rubin, a man from the world of hip-hop and metal, knocked on Johnny's door. He said, "I don't want to change you, I just want to record you." The result was the American Recordings albums. Just Johnny, a guitar, and the truth. It won Grammys. It captured a whole new generation of punks and rockers. Johnny Cash was back, bigger and darker than ever. And in 1998, after winning a Grammy for an album Nashville wouldn't touch, Johnny Cash and his team took out a full-page ad in Billboard magazine. The photo showed Johnny Cash, snarling, thrusting his middle finger directly at the camera. And underneath, the caption read, "American Recordings and Johnny Cash would like to acknowledge the Nashville music establishment and country radio for your support." It was the loudest, most glorious go-to-hell in music history. That finger was pointed directly at Rick Blackburn. It was pointed at the Opry, at the hypocrites, at the plastic cowboys. It was Johnny saying, "I am here, I am real, and you are just tourists." Johnny Cash left this world in 2003. He left behind a legacy that towers over the industry. But he never crossed those names off his list. He never forgave them. Because for Johnny Cash, forgiveness was for sinners who repented, not for the men who tried to kill the music. Was Johnny right to hold that grudge? Or does hate only burn the hand that holds it? One thing is for sure, that middle finger still hangs over Nashville like a ghost. If you enjoyed this look into the darker side of music history, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Rumor Report. We're digging up the stories they tried to bury. Until next time, keep walking the line.